A couple of weeks ago, I guess, Harding and I had a conversation on the telephone about historic Pinewood Cemetery. I guess the Ballough family has individuals in historic Pinewood Cemetery. Several generations, and I'm on the board of historic Pinewood, and we're very involved in bringing historic Pinewood up to the level of the greatest...
You're trying to bring a cemetery alive.
You are correct.
Just go ahead and say
You are correct. And it started me thinking about Harding. And while Harding Ballough is a name that has been popping up in my memory since I was the director of the Museum of Arts and Sciences, very well-known, local guy who's had a very fascinating career. But from my perspective, what he's doing recently, what he's doing now is of tremendous importance to me. You know, we've been enjoying Growing Bolder series on television that shows what people in mid-career or as they move through their life, the kinds of things they gravitate toward, the passions that grab them and give them a career, a second or third or sometimes fourth profession. And I thought, gee, Harding is just perfect. He is the Mr. Growing Bolder guy. And so I thought we'd invite him on today, Roland, and maybe once a month invite in an artist who has chosen art as a second or third career, whether it's music, photography, the visual arts, dance, whatever it is. I think it gives our audience a very interesting perspective in the significance and the importance, the lifelong significance of the arts in someone's life.
Now, Gary is far more cultured than me, and he says Ballough. He always has a way of properly pronouncing names, but from a kid till now, I've always said Ballough.
Well, you were perfectly correct.
Yeah, Ballough.
Answered it as yes.
It derives from an old Norman French name, Ballou, and in England, after 1066, they added the GH, which is silent.
Ah, very good. Is there, we have Ballough Road.
Yeah, tell us about the connection,
right.
Harding.
Way back in the end of the last century before, 2 centuries before, in the late 1800s, my grandfather with a partner founded Seabreeze as a separate town. Then he built a bridge across into the marsh on the west bank, the mainland. It was marsh, so he had to build a dredge. And when he built the dredge, he filled in a base for a road and built a road. It's not a street, it's a road between two towns.
Okay.
And they named it after him. It went down to North Beach Street, which was then paved with oyster shell.
Well, this is my last day on radio, I have to announce to everybody. I have now been upped by Mr. Ballough and his voice. I get goosebumps, and I'm a man. I quit.
Well, Harding has had a career on radio.
True.
As a matter of fact.
You did?
Yes.
Roland,
early on, I used to do a lot of radio in Daytona Beach.
I love it.
Let's let Harding sort of freewheel it here and tell us a little bit about himself. I know he's a native from the area, but Harding, give us a capsule, if you possibly can, about your career that led up to the photography that you're now producing.
All right. I was born in Daytona. I was a little Daytona Beach boy for years, and looking back, I loved it. It was a nice place to be born and be growing up. As I said, my grandfather had been one of the early all but founders. In fact, my great-grandparents came down from I think it was Wisconsin, to join a fellow named Matthias Day, who was trying to found a little town, and they founded it. So they signed the original charter of Daytona Beach. I think it was in 1876, if my memory is correct.
That's correct.
That's cool. Good to hear I was correct. Every now and then I'm right. What would you like to hear further? I grew up here.
Well, tell us about your career when you left Daytona, as people tend to. What did you do? Tell us about your career.
Well, I was in the military very young. I was in the Korean War by choice. In fact, I had a dear friend. I was in a very comfortable place in Japan as an intelligence officer and enjoying myself very much. And we had, about the photography, I can bring that in here. We had a little photographic based there because we needed it for our intelligence work. We had a photographer fellow. He was an officer, and I'd go in and look over his shoulder. And I became fascinated by what you can do in a dark room. You can paint with light if you get good at it, and I've been doing it for years and would like to think I'm beginning to get good at it. I've been at it for a long time.
Now, you did a book on the Korean War, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Oh, nice. You have done some research, I see. Yes. The origins, why the Korean War came about, what made it have to happen. And I was at the front for some time by choice because a dear friend was shot up and I heard about it and I wrote a letter and said, please send me. I went and I'm glad I was there. I was in counterintelligence, which means I didn't have to shoot anybody, but I was doing lots of interesting work at the front, all kinds. We would capture prisoners and interrogate them thoroughly. And you may remember that the Chinese announced to the world when they came in that they had sent their volunteer army into Korea. I remember once when I had a newly captured Chinese prisoner, we'd go out at night and capture them. And I finished debriefing him, so to speak, on what we called order of battle information, which means who's on the other side, where are they, and how much. That's order of battle. And then I said, by the way, you volunteered. Tell me how you volunteered. And he said, I was in the rice field in China, in our farm. And he said, an army truck came up, and they told me to get on the truck, and I had just volunteered.
You, and you.
I had just volunteered.
There you go. Mr. Ballough, on television...
I'm Hardy.
Well, I'm Mr. Villa. I'm just kidding.
Yes, okay.
I'm just so jealous of his voice. Nowadays on television, on American Hero Channel or the History Channel, they have these documentaries, Apocalypse, why and how World War I began, how World War II began, and I think that perhaps your information would be very influential in a History Channel. Why did we have the Korean War?
I did.
Well, wait a minute. Harding, do you call it a war? Or do you call it a police action?
I don't like police action. That was said to make it not sound too important at the time. I believe Mr. Truman used it first. I believe he was the one credited, his writers. No, it was a war. Of course it was a war. Certainly.
When you're being shot at and you're shooting back, that's a war.
And there are lots of people involved on both sides.
Lots of people.
Volume.
Anyway,
scale.
So you were there and you had the photographic studio and you were...
No, I didn't have... I didn't. No, that was back in Japan.
Oh, and back in
All
Japan.
I had was a newly purchased fine Mamiya camera, but I had it with me. So I was constantly photographing as I was carrying out my work. Often I would photograph a prisoner of war right after I had interrogated him, for example. I photographed one prisoner in the midst of an interrogation. And you see the strain on his face because his political officer, back when he was on the other side, had said to him, if they ever capture you, they will interrogate you and then they'll shoot you. And he was expecting to be soon shot. Wow. And you see it on his face. And later, as he began to realize we weren't shooting him at all, I photographed him and you could see the face getting more relaxed. Of course he was repatriated later.
Were those classified photos at the time?
Not classified then or now or ever. They were mine and I controlled them.
Fast forward a little bit further after the Korean War, what was your career?
Well, let me see. I decided I wanted to go into the Foreign Service, the diplomatic corps, the Department of State. So I managed to pass the very difficult, demanding tests and put the fact that I'd passed in the back pocket, and I went on to graduate school at Berkeley. In fact, let me tell you how I chose Berkeley. I was on a 2-year contract to the Department of State, not as a member, but as a contractee in Europe. We were doing a special project, and we were finishing it up, and I was in contact with a very elegant gentleman who knew his way around the world. And I said, I'm going back to the States and go to graduate school. And he said, why don't you go to the best graduate school in the United States? And I said, what's that? He said, why, Berkeley, of course. I said, why? He said, it has the most Nobel laureates on the teaching staff. That got my attention. I checked into Berkeley, found it was pretty darn good. Went to Berkeley with 3 fellowships running simultaneously, which helped a lot, and had a fun time for a long time, working on my MA and most of my PhD.
And 20 years later, it became the hotbed of reactionary politics in the United States.
A big mix.
Wild, a big, very, very big mix.
Right.
Tell us about your. You also did some studies at Princeton, didn't you?
Briefly, but I was able to compare Princeton, Harvard, and Berkeley because I did do one graduate course at Princeton, one at Harvard. And of the 3, I prefer Berkeley.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well,
and they're all great schools.
California's a wonderful. Back then, California was even more of a wonderful place.
Oh, even more. Okay.
Bring us forward. Fast forward.
All right. What happened? I didn't go into the Department of State. A very fine organization called then the Atomic Energy Commission, which controlled the bomb and all the peaceful uses applications also, nuclear power and isotopes for medical and all of that. It was a great place to be. They sent out a team to the 10 best universities in the country to find some key young people to be future officers, and they wanted to keep the staff building up and growing, and they came to Berkeley. And they'd asked the professors who their best students were, he says modestly, and I got interviewed, and they offered me, and the offer was so good I couldn't go to Department of State, which I had aimed at doing. I went right to AEC, and a few years later, after I'd been in the Atomic Energy Commission International Affairs, they sent me to Europe as the AEC representative to Western European countries. Interesting assignment.
Wow.
And that was the Paris Embassy, actually.
That's also a nice place to be.
I was in Paris for many years.
Hard job, but somebody's got to do it.
Oh, exactly, exactly. And I enjoyed Paris very much for years. I spent almost 11 years.
Something tells me that Paris enjoyed him, too.
Well, thank you, sir.
I get that drift as well. All right, then you left Paris and you came back to the States.
Let me see. What did I come back to the
When did you start?
Oh, I remember why. My parents reached a point when they needed me, and I resigned and came back to help look after them. That was why I came back.
And that was here in Daytona?
Here in Daytona, our old hometown. Yes.
Oh, wow.
Now, did you dabble in stocks and bonds here?
Well, the family business, which was run by my brother, was stocks and bonds. A brokerage. A small, full-service brokerage, and I ran that for about a year.
Terrific.
Yes.
Terrific. Okay, bring us forward.
He's seducing me with his voice. I'm a man. And I'm saying, I guess because I do something, I make a living on my voice.
Well, you appreciate a real radio voice.
Oh, listen to that.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't need any modulators or special things inside your studio. You just turned on the mic and went for it.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, Harding, in many interviews you've done, you make a distinction between a professional photographer and a photographer.
Well, there are a lot of people who aim cameras and make something or other, but I like to think that with a lot of years of experience, I turned into a more advanced photographer, that's all.
And
I don't even want to use the word professional, just learned more and got a little better at the job.
Yeah, you tend to shy away from the word professional.
Exactly.
And tell us about your approach to taking photographs and whether or not people can legitimately read meaning from your photographs.
I hope they can. I hope to make it possible for them to, or try to help them to. Well, when I encounter a subject, and let us say it's a human subject, because I do those often, though I like to do animals and other things, but I like people as subjects. And the first thing I want to do, I want to know that person a bit. I don't want to just be introduced to them and start photographing them. I want to know them, if possible, get to know them in a day or two or three before I photograph them, to know something about who they are and what makes them tick and what their sensibilities are. And then I attempt to bring out something about that human being in the way that makes a statement, a revelation would be the key word, about that human being when I photograph them. I want to tell you something about that person when I photograph them.
Do you still use traditional camera?
Absolutely. I'm insistent.
No digital camera
here? I wouldn't touch a digital camera with a 10-foot pole.
Is that because it's too sterile, too exacting, and you use shades of colors and lighting and things like that? I
don't like color. I love black and white. I know you are. But I do find shading in black and white.
And there's a whole different thing there. You make grays come alive.
Well said. I can do a better job I can make you a better photograph if I use traditional film and paper and chemicals, and you work 4 times as long and spend more money, but you get a better photograph.
And the processing is part of that art.
Very much so. In the darkroom, you do some of your most creative work later.
Now, I know that photographs have negatives, but have you ever taken a picture and in the processing you've messed it up, or does it not make any difference because you have a negative?
Well, you can mess up lots of prints as long as the negative is intact.
Okay.
And in fact, the process of making a final print that's good involves usually throwing away 3 or 4 as you work toward the final.
How often, when you take the picture, is after the processing, you saw what you saw through the lens? How often do you connect the two?
Often I'm altering a bit, refining. Altering is a terrible word. I'm doing something to improve what I did originally when I pushed that shutter.
I'm going to ask you about your merchandising. What do you do with your photographs? Do you just have them in displays? Do you put them in books? Can they be purchased? Or are they in museums? Because people want to see your work. So let us know where we can see Harding Ballough's photos.
It's not easy to see Harding Ballough's photos, so I am on. You did find me online, didn't you?
Yes, I did.
Someone put me there. A friend of mine put me without my knowledge. Then he called me up and said, "You're on."
It's a display on YouTube.
Right,
I put in Harding Ballough, Ballough.
Correct.
And it popped up there.
Good for you. You did well to find it. I'm glad you did.
And that I was like, whoa, this guy is good.
Let me interject here for a moment. You know, about 15 years ago, Harold Halliday Costain walked into the Museum of Arts and Sciences. And Hal was about 90 at this point in his career, a major American fashion photographer with footnotes everywhere. And he owned every single image that he ever printed. And I called my colleague at the Southeastern Museum of Photography, and Dan Baferi came over and met Hal. And over about a year period, we organized an exhibition of his work so that he fully realized how important his contribution to American photography had been. The museum has a large collection of it now that is available on rotating basis. We sent out exhibits of his work around the state's museums. Southeastern Museum of Photography has a large body of his work. And I just saw in a Sotheby catalog an upcoming sale that includes work by Harold Halliday Costain, way after both Hal and his wife Blossom are no longer with us. The work still lives and is being circulated. So maybe you and I need to have a conversation with Kevin over at the Southeastern Museum of Photography, organize an exhibition. You know, the state's museums are always looking for first quality exhibitions that they trade each other in a sort of quid pro quo or basis. And this could get your work out to a larger audience.
Good idea. Yeah. What I do often is present photographs by having my friend project them before an audience. And we have an invited or an open to the audience, anyone who wants to come, that is. And this is often in libraries. And we'll have a full audience in the library auditorium because they've had advance notice that we'd be there. My friend projects one. And at the very beginning, I say, don't hold your comments to the end. Let's hear what you want to tell me about that or ask me about it. And we turn it into a conversation. We show one image after another. And, of course, at the end of an audience having seen a lot of photographs, I do get orders, of course.
I think we have the makings of a really interesting project in the next couple of years.
I'm delighted to hear it.
I'm going to be going up to Jacksonville later this month to the yearly meeting of the Florida Art Museum Directors Association. I'm an emeritus director of that group as well, and I'm gonna talk about Harding Ballough.
Excellent. I like that. Good.
Up there.
I want people to see my work. I'm not trying hard to be commercial. I just would like them to see it and react to it.
Well, I think what you could do for us is start working on a one-page sort of summary of both your life, the high points in your life, and your philosophy.
Well, there have been so many high points.
Of photography. Well, not all of them, Hardy.
Okay.
Just keep to the ones that we could do in public. And that would help tremendously.
Good. Well, I like what you're proposing.
Tell us about the future now. What do you have on store for Harding Ballough?
Well, I keep encountering people or getting people who come to me who want to be photographed. Often they'll see my work and say, oh, can you photograph me? I do that quite often. Often I do them on my own initiative. I pick out something I think ought to be photographed. Often a person, quite often a person, but not always. Sometimes it's a creature. Sometimes it can be anything, but mostly people. I like people very much. And I want to reveal to my viewer something about that person. In a manner of speaking, make a statement, a revealing statement about that person.
We do have a phone call coming through.
Yes.
Hi, you're live with Harding Ballough.
Hi, Gary, Roland. Holland and Harding with Nancy.
Hello.
Nancy,
Hi,
yes, the former mayor of Ponce Inlet.
Oh.
Yes, I wanted to say hi to Harding. I met you in 2012, Harding, if you remember when I was.
I do remember, yes.
And I've really enjoyed talking with you the times I've run across you. And I'm going to ask Gary or Roland to give you my phone number so that you can call me and we can make arrangements to meet up again.
His voice is getting you too, isn't it? I knew it.
Well, as you can see, he's a fascinating guy, and we had some really interesting chat.
I had all kinds of warning about Harding that this would happen.
Good warning.
Good warning. All right, Nancy, thank you. I'll give it to him, okay?
All right. I'm really enjoying learning more about you.
Thank you for your call.
Well, I guess, Harding, I want to thank you very much for taking your time and coming in and visiting with us. If you have any additional bon mots or words of wisdom for us, tell me about, you're no longer a kid. I'm 70.
I can't even remember
just
what I
turned 70, but you're going as strong. There's a lesson in Harding Ballough for me. I'll tell you that. Give us a little pep talk about about how photography has enriched your life, invigorated it, and
both are good operative words. I like them. It has added a great deal to my life in several senses. It's made my life vastly more interesting. I have a sense of creativity, if that's not too big a word or self-consciously important a word. I like to create something that somebody has not been able to see before. They'll see themselves or something in themselves in the photograph that they've not seen before. I want to bring out something about that person.
In the East, we call that wisdom.
Oh, nice to call it wisdom. I like the word. Yeah.
Do you shoot photographs every day?
Not far from every day, but let me give you an example. I might spend an hour and a half with a person, call it a photographic session, and I try to make that often near their house because they might want to go in and have a slight change of clothing or fix their hair or something like that. So I'll work in a backyard or side yard. I do not want sunlight. I want skylight. Skylight is wonderful light, and I use skylight in my photographs. And I'll often have a person holding something behind them as a backdrop so that we just see a tone and not distracting things. And another person near me holding a reflector so that we can fill in on the darker side of the face and bring out more detail. So I'll work with two people, and I usually recruit them on the spot, friends or relatives of the subject, and I'll spend an hour and a half. And then after I've spent an hour and a half exposing, I'll spend 3 or 4 or 5 days in the darkroom.
Fantastic. You sound almost like Norman Rockwell's technique. When he does series of of drawings, he followed a very similar pattern of sort of sneaking up on the subject, getting to know them, understanding the environment.
I always want to know them if I can. Now and then you're forced to photograph someone you don't know, and that can happen, but if possible, know them.
Do you have any dates yet in the future where people would be able to see your shows? Or when you do, give us a call.
I will. I think, let me see when. Right now, it'll probably be the Ormond Library, upcoming probably in the early fall.
Terrific.
More than likely. And the libraries are our cultural centers, and that's a natural place to go.
Yeah, we're very lucky also at the proactive stance that Volusia County Public Libraries have taken in being a library and more than a library, enriching the experience. And we actually have staff members on the library team that do this, that are writing grants statewide and regionally to raise small amounts of money that will allow them to broaden the influence and the importance of the library. And you're up the crest of the wave there, big guy.
That's nice.
We got less than 5 minutes. In 1 minute, tell us, in radio time, tell us about your radio career. Was it here in Daytona Beach?
I'll be very brief. When I was much younger than I am now, even, I was in my later teens, I became fascinated by radio. And I got to know the people at the one station in Daytona Beach then. And it was just a little before television came to Daytona. It was up in the Northeast and far west, but it hadn't gotten here yet. And everybody listened to the one station. And I got to know them, and pretty soon I was doing a little disc jockeying and then some early morning newscasts. But my interest was in the news of the world and what happens in that larger world out there. I began to use feed-ins on teletype to me that I would rewrite into into news programs, and I started doing the news programs for Daytona Beach. The evening news was first local news at 6, and then I'd go off and finish up preparing my world news, and I go on at 6:30 for 15 minutes with world news.
Do you have any of those recordings?
I'm afraid none of that was recorded. I'm unfortunately.
I'd be replaying it.
Oh, yes. No, it didn't happen then.
I tell you what, I may personally call you and have you come in to voice some things for me.
With pleasure.
I would love that.
With pleasure. Thank you.
And I can't wait.
He's going to do the Culture Comes Alive spot that I have promised big. We're going to have you do the voiceover.
Yeah,
very good.
Absolutely. And please let us know when the Ormond exhibition is going to be there.
We don't have
I'll be first in line. I want to come.
We're aiming at mid-fall, but we haven't got the date yet.
Very good.
Introduce your nephew who's here with you
I
today.
have Dr. Jerry Ballough, of whom I'm very proud. He's my #1 nephew.
Dr. Jerry.
Oh, thank you very much. I didn't expect to be introduced, but I have to just say I'm so proud of my uncle. He's an absolutely brilliant photographer, but brilliant in many ways, and he's inspired me all my life.
So he's sharp as a tack.
Terrific.
He's really sharp.
And where are you from, Jerry?
I'm a professor of biology at LaSalle University in Philadelphia.
Fantastic.
And honored to be there. And where my wife and I are down visiting. I'm from Daytona Beach. She's from Gettysburg, and we're happily down here spending some time with Harding. And I think I may have more photos as a personal collection than anyone else.
Hold on to them. Hold on to them.
Let me make a comment, if I may, Jerry. Jerry keeps buying from me, and as my family member, he gets deep discounts.
I do. I get the family discount.
Yes.
Because the paper and the chemicals do cost money.
They are. They're very costly.
The labor, well, you can work that out.
Well, Jerry, thank you very much.
Thank
and
you.
Harding,
Thank
it's
you.
great
My
to
pleasure.
see you. It's
My
been
pleasure.
a long, long time.
It has been a long.
All right. I tell you what, this has been a very entertaining hour. Thank you for arranging this, Gary Libby. Appreciate it very, very much. This has been Culture Comes Alive for a very special Saturday. In just a few moments, we're going to have Steve the Garden Guy. He'll be on with the Green Earth Garden Show. Thank you, Mr. Ballough.
My pleasure.
And thank you, Mr. Ballough.
Thank you.
It's Ballough, right, for you?
It is Ballough.
All right, very good.
And
All
thank you, Mr. Villa.
Thank you, Mr. Libby. Good night, John Boyd. Good night, Mary Ellen. Good night, Grandpa. Okay. We're good on the mountain. All right.